carbon dioxide is now considered an air pollutant as of 2009. For millennia, it was never considered a pollutant, and it's not a pollutant. But this is a need that we must again properly describe all the benefits and all the realistic aspects of carbon dioxide, and show that there's been complete misrepresentation of a supposed climate crisis, especially in California.
Dr. Enstrom, you've had a long and distinguished career as a research professor of epidemiology at UCLA, with a PhD in physics from Stanford and an MPH. What initially drew you to studying environmental factors like air pollution and their potential links to mortality, and how was your training in physics influenced your approach to epidemiological data?
Well, the interesting thing about my background is I'm trained in the hardest of hard sciences, that's physics, and in the softest of public health sciences, that's epidemiology. And so you have two different approaches to scientific evidence. And I switched from physics to epidemiology because I wanted to do something somewhat more practical than studying elementary particles. And I was able to identify the Mormon population as a very healthy group that hadn't really been studied epidemiologically. And that allowed me to transfer basically from being a postdoc in elementary particle physics to a postdoc in cancer epidemiology, because I impressed a number of prominent epidemiologists that my research was worthwhile. And so I've done a lot of work in lifestyle epidemiology that is showing good health practices result in lower death rates, longer longevity, reduced cancer, and a number of other factors. And along the way, I have also interacted with many things here in California. I'm a native Californian, and one of the issues that we had a lot, especially when I was young, is smog was a major problem in Los Angeles. In fact, smog in the, say, 1950 was maybe the worst anywhere in the United States here in Los Angeles. And so subsequent efforts were made with the establishment of EPA and the California Air Resources Board to combat smog, and it's been very successful. It went from being a very polluted city in the middle of the 20th century to now one of the cleanest in the entire world. And I was concerned because I saw the misuse of epidemiology in different environmental issues. And this is the one that is maybe the most prominent of the issues that I've examined. And with my rigorous training by a physicist, I was trained actually by a scientist who won the Nobel Prize in physics, and made me appreciate the importance of honest and reproducible science. And so when I saw how science was being misused in environmental epidemiology, I wanted to do something to correct that the best that one scientist can have an influence. And it's been a real adventure. There are very few epidemiologists trained like me, and so I wanted to take advantage of my training and I have succeeded in having an impact. I wouldn't say it's overcome the massive number of people that use what I consider to be bad epidemiology, but it has had an impact.
Your summary highlights that the US and California have some of the lowest average annual PM 2.5 levels in the world. And PM 2.5 is particulate matter 2.5. So maybe for our listeners, you could explain a little bit what PM 2.5 is, just to give a little bit of background, because to you that's second nature, but for someone, an average person, they might not quite understand PM 2.5.
Yes. Well, this is one of the major pollutants. In years ago, like 50 years ago, it was called total suspended particulates. And then as they did more and more refined measurements, they determined based on the diameter of the particles that there was something called coarse particulate matter that's defined as 10 microns in diameter. That's 10 millionths of a meter. And then within that, there is fine particulate matter, which is 2.5 microns in diameter. And the sort of etiologic basis is that these very fine particles can penetrate deep into the lungs and then cause problems with the lining of the lung that eventually could lead to respiratory diseases and ultimately claiming that it could result in death. And so that's basically how PM 2.5 came to be. It's just abbreviated as PM 2.5 for particulate matter that's 2.5 microns in diameter.
So with that understanding, so your summary highlights that the US and California have some of the lowest average annual PM 2.5 levels in the world versus much higher, such as Africa, India, and China. Can you walk us through what this data tells us about actual air quality trends and why it's important for putting regulatory discussions in perspective?
Well, again, if you go back to the sort of the beginnings of PM 2.5, which is roughly 30 years ago, we had more of an issue here in California. Even though the levels were coming down, it was still an issue here in California, and it was an issue across the country. And so they adopted this regulation in 1997 that there would be EPA would monitor the PM 2.5 levels and then implement controls if they exceeded the standard. It's called the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. And what's been, and this has been a process that's been going on now up to the present. And the problem is that along the way, starting with a publication in 2005, where I showed that there was no relationship in California between PM 2.5 and total mortality, and then began looking at other data specifically focused on California, I showed that there was no effect here, even though there was a small effect in the United States from the different epidemiologic studies that have been done. And so this led me to challenge what was being done by the California Air Resources Board, which is the relevant regulatory agency, and the fact that they were not really properly considering the null evidence. They were just using sort of consensus science from EPA and the opinions of many of the other scientists that were doing research that showed some effect. The, these effects are very small by epidemiologic standards. To give you a rough idea, the increase in particulate matter, 10 micrograms per cubic meter, is often associated with about a 10% increase in mortality risk for all causes. But if you look at a very strong relationship between, say, cigarette smoking and lung cancer, you get relationships that go up to 100-fold, not just 10% increase, but 100-fold increase. And with total mortality, it's often 2 or 3 times, not a 10% increase. So this is very weak epidemiology, and it's a very appropriate to challenge it because it doesn't satisfy criteria to establish a genuine causal relationship.
And you've compiled data from 6 major California cohort studies spanning decades, 1977 to 2009, including the Adventist Health Study, California Teacher Study, American Cancer Society, and others. What do these studies consistently show regarding the relationship between ambient PM 2.5 increases and total mortality? And why is this body of evidence so compelling?
Well, again, we have the need, when you're doing scientific research, you have to assess all the evidence. And what is relevant in California is the evidence that's specific to California residents. And this applies to not just this health issue, but all health issues. So you don't want to examine what's going on in Africa and use that as a guideline for what's happening in California. You want to stick with the California specific evidence. And so when you do a broad brush like EPA and you look at all of the United States or all of Canada or all of Europe or all of China, you can get some different results. But if you focus in on what's actually happening in California, you find that there is no relationship. And it's true with each of the California specific studies that have been done. And that's why I have tried to make an issue out of this, because I have published 2 major studies that show no effect in California, and I have a body of other unpublished research that also shows no effect in California, plus the other studies that are independently done. And so it's very important because California is maybe the state with the most burdensome regulations of any state in the United States. And if these regulations aren't justified scientifically, they shouldn't be implemented. And this is one of the factors that has caused the cost of living to go up in California, and the overregulation that's driven out a lot of businesses.
In your May 22nd, 2026 letter to Dr. Jason Su at UC Berkeley, and your earlier proposals to CARB, C-A-R-B. What is C-R-A-B?
That's the acronym for the California Air Resources Board.
Okay. So you pointed out that recent research seems to ignore this strong null evidence. What are the main flaws or omissions you see in studies claiming significant air pollution impacts on mortality and life expectancy in California?
Again, this is an agency now that I have dealt with. I first submitted my 2005 paper to the California Air Resources Board a little more than 20 years ago, and they just promptly ignored it. That's not the way you treat scientific evidence, especially on a really well-done study that is part of the scientific record. And so I've faced this battle ever since. And it's become quite absurd because with now of 20 years of evidence, and my second major paper came out in 2017, that they would decide to do a study now in the last couple of years. This study's been worked on for the last couple of years, and it's sort of been finalized in the last few months. But the whole notion that they would do a study on total mortality and longevity when there's a massive body of evidence that there's no relationship shows that they're interested in just promoting their agenda indefinitely. They don't want to understand the evidence, the null evidence. And so they have basically ignored the evidence that I have. And this is very bad because it involves some of the investigators who are very well aware of my null evidence and null evidence of others. I'm not the only person that's been a critic. I've compiled something on the order of 60 critics of these relationships generally, not necessarily California specific, but the general issue is made this a 30-year controversy. And the report that just came out doesn't mention the word controversy at all. So they try to make it look like there's, they're contributing something valuable now without looking at the research record.
Well, this leads into you've been a vocal advocate for scientific integrity, including through your Scientific Integrity Institute. What lessons from your experiences with PM 2.5 research, such as reanalysis and responses to criticism, should the scientific community and policymakers take to heart today?
Well, this is one of my goals, that the scientific method must be followed in all scientific investigations. And there's no excuse for trying to justify things because maybe there's some indirect benefit that might come from misrepresenting data, that in the eyes of these people that misrepresent data. And this is just all rigorous scientists believe and promote the scientific method. And so the people that I'm dealing with regarding these air pollution claims are just simply not following the scientific method, and they're also not willing to debate. This is very important. If they have a disagreement with me, that they allow me to engage, and that agencies like CARB be forced to see all the evidence and then make regulations based on what the entire body of evidence is, not just based on their agenda.
After years of challenging prevailing views on this topic, what keeps you motivated to continue this work? And what message would you like to share with listeners who care about evidence-based environmental policy?
Well, again, I want the best for American science. I grew up in the Cold War era, and at that time we were up against the Soviet Union, and we had really efforts to show that we were superior to the Soviet Union, and that we could do this by doing the best science possible. But now we fast forward to 2026, and we're up against Communist China. Communist China is in many ways exceeding us in STEM fields and in many areas of scientific research. And it's really important that for America's future to focus on staying at the top in STEM fields. And this is one example of how backwards things are. The key investigator of the study you mentioned earlier on PM 2.5 and longevity is a Chinese scientist trained in China. He's not focused on the high levels of air pollution in China. He's focused on the low levels in California. And so it shows a complete disregard for honest science and honest regulatory policy. So that really keeps me motivated, because I want California to be the great state that it used to be.
And then one question that's tied to this with regard to misrepresentation of data in schools now, with where climate crisis is being promoted as fact, which disregards real scientific facts and data. And as you're a member of the CO2 Coalition, what are your thoughts on a climate crisis and the data that's being presented?
Well, it follows somewhat the same pattern as the situation with fine particulate matter and air pollution in general. In fact, carbon dioxide is now considered an air pollutant as of 2009. For millennia, it was never considered a pollutant, and it's not a pollutant. But this is a need that we must again properly describe all the benefits and all the realistic aspects of carbon dioxide, and show that there's been complete misrepresentation of a supposed climate crisis, especially in California. And so this is where the CO2 Coalition can have a big educational impact, because again, we have a terrible loss in our education system where students can't read, write, and do arithmetic, the famous 3 R's, and instead they're forced to learn things about a supposed climate crisis, and it's just it's got to stop. If there's any way to stop it, we've got to find a way to stop it.
Thank you for joining us on Climate Debrief. Executive producer is Angela Wheeler. Producers, Ethan Oddie and Scott Wheeler. You can find more episodes of Climate Debrief at co2coalition.org.